Dad was always kind of a weird guy. Weird and strict. I always thought it was just because he was a single parent, but even that seemed to only barely cover his odd behavior. He expected the best of me, expected my chores to be done, expected the rules to be followed, and if I didn't, there was only one punishment that would do. Dad never hit me with a belt, he never spanked me with his hand, he never took my stuff or put me in time out. No, Dad had a different sort of punishment he used. He didn't introduce the jar until I was 6, and it was revealed with a lot of serious contemplation. I remember coming home from my first day of kindergarten and finding Dad sitting in the living room, the jar on the little end table where the magazines and the rickrack usually stood. The jar may have begun life as a pickle jar. It always smelled a little briny, and inside were beans. They were spotted pinto beans, the kind I had used on art projects and crafts since before I could remember, and I noticed that they had been filled up to the brim. All in all, there were probably about 3 bags of beans in there, and a piece of scotch tape declared it to be my jar. "Take a seat. We need to have a serious talk," he said, and I ended up just sitting on the floor of our living room and looking up at him. He looked very serious, more serious than I'd ever seen him before, and that scared me a bit. Up until now, Dad had always been this goofy guy who played pirates and astronauts and Mario Kart with me. But now he looked like a judge, ready to sentence me to death if I didn't have a pretty good defense for my crimes. "You're 6 now, long past knowing right from wrong. In this family, it's customary to use the bean jar to punish children. Do you see this jar?" He asked it like there was any way I could miss it. I nodded and he smiled, seeming pleased. "The bean jar symbolizes you. It's everything you are and everything you might be. So from now on, when you're bad or insolent or you disobey my orders, I will not yell at you or send you to your room. I won't do anything but take a bean from the bean jar." I almost laughed. Was this a game or something? Was I supposed to be scared of a jar of beans? This had to be another one of Dad's jokes. Dad was always doing stuff like this, telling me how the monsters in my closet could be kept away by a teddy bear, or that the cavity creeps would eat my teeth if I didn't brush them twice a day. Dad was a goofball. He had always been a goofball, but I think it was his face that made me wonder if he was joking or not. Throughout the whole thing, he just sat there, deadly serious, and never averted his eyes from me. "You're a smart kid, just like I was. I see now that you'll need an example. You may think this is just a regular jar, but you're wrong." He reached in and picked up a bean. Dead wrong. He didn't even take it out. He just lifted a little, hovering it over the pile. But he didn't need to do anything else. Suddenly, miraculously, it felt like someone was touching my brain. It was the feeling of getting a sudden sadness, a sudden bit of anxiety, and I wanted him to drop that bean back into the jar. I needed to be whole. I needed all my beans, and he must have seen that on my face, because he dropped it back in, and I trembled as I tried to make sense of what had just happened. "I'm sorry, but you have to know what's at stake here. You're my last chance. I have to make sure that you're perfect. And the bean jar knows perfection from flaw. My own father used this method, and his father, and his father before him. The bean jar is always used until the child's 18th birthday, or until all the beans are gone. I was panting when I asked him what would happen if all the beans were gone. He looked at me without mirth, without any sign of a joke or a goof. "You don't want to know." That was how it started with the bean jar. Dad didn't suddenly turn into an ogre or become a villain overnight. He went back to being the same guy he'd always been. We would play video games together, build with my Legos, play pretend after school. My dad had never scared me like that before. He and I were always really close, but I remember how he would get when he had to take beans out of the jar. His face would become completely neutral, and he would walk to the jar and take out a bean before crushing it between his thumb and forefinger. The bean jar was utilized even for the most trivial of infractions. Forgot to wash my dish? Lose a bean. Forgot to put my clothes away? Lose a bean. Stayed up too late on a school night? Lose a bean. There was no escalation either. There was never any difference between forgetting to clean up my toys or yelling at Dad because I was frustrated. It was always one bean at a time, ground to dust between his large, calloused fingers. He would look at me, too, with this mixture of pain and resolve once it was done, his stoicism only going so far. Those times he took a bean, however, were unbearable. It felt as if each bean was a piece of my psyche, and he was turning it to dust. As a child, every bean made me hyper-aware of my actions, but I was still just a child. Sometimes I forgot things. Sometimes I was lazy. Sometimes I thought I could sneak around and get away with not doing what I was told. I was always caught, always punished, and I always fell into a state of anxious, nervous emotions once it was done. I hated the way it felt when he crushed those beans, and I didn't want to lose another one. I didn't want to lose them so badly that I trained myself to perform the task expected of me without fail. 5 a.m., start the laundry. 5:20, make breakfast. 5:30, wash my dishes. 5:40, dress. 6 o'clock, clean up my room. 6:30, backpack on, fully dressed, waiting by the door to leave. 3:10, get home, do my homework. 4:30, clean the house. 5, start dinner. 6, eat dinner when my father got home. 9 o'clock, brush teeth, take shower. 9:30, bedtime. Every day, without fail, these things were done, or I would be one bean the shorter. This manifested itself into a kind of mania in me. Not only did I have to get all my chores done, but I needed to get good grades too. After a while, good wasn't good enough. What if Dad decided that C's and B's weren't good enough? I strove for all A's, and Dad seemed happy with my efforts. To the other kids, however, I was a weirdo. I didn't really have any friends. Dad was my only friend, but it was a strange kind of friendship, like living with someone who has schizophrenia and could change at the slightest inclination. I didn't have any real friends, not till high school, when I met Cass. Cassandra Bigley was not what you would consider a model student. Her parents had high expectations for her, but she was middling at best. She came to me because I was the smartest kid in school, at least according to the other kids, and she begged me to help her. I helped her, I tutored her, showed her the way, and soon her grades improved. That was how we became friends, how she was the first one to find out about the bean jar. So, what? He just takes out a bean and crushes it? Yes, I said, not sounding at all mystified about the process. And what? I mean, you have less beans? I thought about it. Dad had never actually told me what would happen, only that it would be terrible. When he takes out all the beans, then something awful will happen. Like what? No dessert for a month? I don't know, but I know that when he crushes those beans, it's like a piece of my sanity is mushed. I feel crazy after he smushes a bean. I don't like feeling that way. I don't like it at all. I started crying. I hadn't meant to. I was 16 and I never cried anymore. But Cass didn't make me feel bad about it. She just held me while I cried, and eventually I stopped. It had felt good to be held. Dad hugged me, but he never comforted me. I didn't have a mom, someone whose job seemed to be comforting me, and as Cass held me, I realized what I had been missing all these years. I had been missing a mom that I had never even known. We hung out a lot after that, Cass and I. Despite our age, it was never inappropriate. She gave me something I'd been missing, a friend without the threat of punishment looming over our relationship. The realization made me feel different about my dad. He was still the lovable goofball that he had always been, but I started to see how our entire relationship hung under the shadow of that bean jar. As I pulled away, he became more sullen, more suspicious, and I saw him holding the bean jar sometimes as if he wished to smash them. If I wasn't misbehaving, though, he couldn't. That was always the deal, and he knew it. I knew it, and he knew that as long as I abided by the rules, he couldn't punish me. Despite how it will sound, Dad was never cruel about the bean jar. He never used it to take out his frustration. He never came home and punished me simply because he had had a bad day. The rules were established. We had both agreed to them, and I knew that by following them, I could be safe. I think, deep down, Dad really did think he was doing the best for me, thought he was molding me into something better than I could be. And I guess he was right. Though it wasn't fair. Not really. Then, one day, after coming home from Cass's, it all came to a head. Dad was supposed to be at work, so Cass and I came back to the house to play video games. She had never even seen a Super Nintendo, and she wanted to play some Mario Kart with me. We had come in, laughing and making jokes, when someone cleared their throat loudly, sending a chill up my spine and turning me slowly toward my dad. He was sitting on the couch. He looked so much like he had the day that he had introduced the bean jar, and he was wearing that look of pain and resolve. You come home late, your chores aren't done, your homework is undone, and you've brought someone here without my permission. Why have you decided to break the rules like this? I saw the hammer come down on the table, but I hadn't realized what he'd done until then. It turned the bean that he had laid there into smithereens, and I shuddered as I gripped my head and moaned. If he noticed, he made no comment. He just brought the hammer down on another one, and I nearly vomited as a pain like no other went through me. He had lined up 4, one for each infraction, but he had never done anything like this before. It had always been one at a time, and that had been bad enough. This, however, was unbearable. "Stop it!" Cass yelled. "Whatever you're doing to him, stop!" But he cut her off. He grabbed her under the arm and heaved her towards the door. This is your fault. You've changed him, made him forget his purpose, but I won't let you kill him. You aren't allowed in this house, never again, and I put her down," I growled, finding my feet and weaving only a little. "You will not touch her." My father looked at me, not believing what he was hearing. "Put her down now," I repeated, stepping up close and getting in his face. You dare to challenge me. You're no different than the rest. I tried to raise you better, but it appears I was a fool. I'll smash every damn bean in that jar if I have to. When all the beans are gone, you'll cease to exist. I'll smash every damn bean in that jar just to prove, just to prove. But he never finished. He let go of the hammer as he clutched at his chest, and it fell from his grip as he grasped at his shirt front. His face had gone from red to purple, and before he hit the ground, it was nearly black. I just stood there for a moment, listening to Cass beat on the door and ask what was wrong. I couldn't answer. I just stood there, feeling like I was suffocating as the realization that my father was dead fell across me. That was 2 years ago. I've been living with Cass since then, her parents taking me in gladly. Cass and I are getting ready for college, and that's when I remembered the house. It's still there, still sitting on the same lot, and I decided that it might be good to sell it so I can pay tuition. There were things inside as well. I've been back a few times to get things, and I knew my father's room was essentially untouched. The police hadn't bothered to search the place. Dad's death was no mystery, after all, and they decided that he had died of a heart attack and saved me a lengthy interrogation. I started cleaning it out as summer began, selling what I could and donating what I couldn't. I found pictures of my dad and I, taken in better times, and far too soon I'd cleaned out everything and was left with only my father's room. I paused at the door, almost feeling like a burglar when I thought about going in there. But finally I decided that this was my house now, and this room was as good as mine too. The room was Spartan, a bed and a dresser and a closet, but it was what I found inside that took me by surprise. 5 jars, each of them bearing a different name. Jacob, Mark, Sylvester, Katie, and James. They were empty, the lids gone, and the taped-on names made them look exactly like mine. What the hell was this? Who were these people? I didn't know any of them, and no one but Dad and I had ever lived in the house. It had always been just the two of us. Always just... No. But no, that couldn't be true, because my mother had once lived with us. There in the back was a 6th jar, the glass broken, but the tape intact. Maggie. When the beans are gone, I heard Dad's voice echo in my head, then you cease to exist. Had the names on those jars been real people? Had I lived with them and simply didn't remember them? How could you remember people who never existed? I sat there for a long time, trying to make sense of it all. and finally decided to write this before it gets unclear. Apparently Dad wasn't as crazy as I might have thought, and maybe I should have been more respectful of the bean jar. It sits on the shelf in my dorm room now. I took it from the house before I sold it, and I guard it jealously. I don't know if it still works the same now that Dad is dead, but I'm not taking any chances. You're still here. Thanks for stopping by. Dr. Plague here. Always a pleasure to see all my new and old viewers coming by for another one of my spooky tales. If you'd like to support the show, you can always take part in one of our channel offers through Fume or Aura, or you can just click on another video when they come up. I'd really appreciate it. For our newer viewers, we also have lots of playlists and other things if you'd like to get caught up. I know some of my series have been going on for quite a while. If you'd like to get my latest book, there's a link down below that'll take you to my Amazon page. Towesey Homestead just came out, so if that's something you'd like to get your hands on, go ahead and have a look down there. If you'd like a signed copy, you can go ahead and email me from my email address on the site, and I'll get with you about shipping information and ship you a signed copy. If you'd like to support the channel in a more monetary fashion, we also have membership through YouTube, and we've got a Patreon that you can get the information for in the description. We have lots of tiers and everything to suit your needs. Patrons that support on the $10 tier, that's our Ghostly Reader tier, get a book anytime I write one, signed and on their doorstep. As you may have noticed, there's a list of patrons and members on the screen, and I'd like to personally thank every one of them for taking a hand in the future of this channel. Well, that's enough for tonight. Dr. Plague, signing off. Have a wonderful evening.